Whenever you see a hearse go by, you know you'll be the next to die. They wrap you up in bloody sheets and throw you down 10,000 feet. They put you in a big black box and cover you up with dirt and rocks. All goes well for about a week until your coffin begins to leak. The worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, the worms lay pinnacle on your snout. They eat your eyes, they eat your nose, they eat the jelly between your toes. A big green worm with rolling eyes crawls in your stomach and out your thighs. Your stomach turns a slimy green and pus pours out like whipping cream. You spread it on a slice of bread, and that's what you eat when you are dead.
Hexes, curses, voodoo practices. Today we think about these terms as myths, legends, and hocus-pocus nonsense. In truth, such things go back all the way to biblical times. There's several instances of curses and karma, cosmic warnings. In the 10 Commandments etched on tablets by Moses, the second commandment declared any who idolize others as gods and doesn't accept God as their supreme and only God shall face his wrath. Illness, grief, violence, and sometimes death will come to those who do not believe and have faith, and sometimes, further generations continue to pay for the sins of their family and ancestors. Curses can be connected to not just a person, but sometimes a place. Though it's open to interpretation and some do not believe in such things as curses, some stories can stand the test of time, and any length of time. Even over a century. The year is 1859. Nothing more than a small mining camp, W.S. Bodie along with a few friends and partners in the claim stock, settled the area when Bodie found a few deposits of gold. Things were slow going and the camp hadn't flourished as quickly or widely Bodie had hoped, so he had to go to other more established settlements to get supplies, and he was accompanied by fellow prospector E.S. Taylor, known as Black Taylor of half-Cherokee ancestry. It was November, and an unforgiving winter storm bore down on them. Bodie couldn't make it through the storm and Taylor continued on to camp, telling Bodie he'd return for him. Some accounts say Taylor did return and couldn't find Bodie and returned again in spring. Other accounts say Taylor never returned because he wanted the gold for himself. Either way, Bodie never made it back to the camp that would later be one of the most successful mining towns, named in honor of him. Even though his body was recovered and properly laid to rest near the camp, he died alone, starving, cold, and waiting for his friend who never returned. The mining camp, named after one of its founders, would not see success until 1877 when plentiful gold-bearing ore was rediscovered. By 1879, Bodie had climbed to a population of between 7,000 and 10,000 people. Although Bodie was one of many boom towns established during the gold rush, it was set apart by two things. The first, there was never a miners' strike like so many other mining towns. The second, there was no large death toll in mining accidents. For a town with over 17 separate mines, there were no reports of cave-ins. This did not mean that Bodie was the safest boom town. Much like the entire Wild West, the town had a rough and rowdy reputation. It said that a vigilante group called the 601, meaning 6 feet under, no trial, and 1 noose. While this tale has not been completely substantiated, there were indeed a lot of violence and lawlessness surrounding Bodie. There were two major fires that happened in Bodie. The first, before the town's peak, started on July 14, 1879. In the newspaper accounts, it was called the Bodie disaster. Right around 8 o'clock, an explosion happened at the Standard Mine started by the powder magazine. It was so fierce, the neighboring town thought it was an earthquake. Surprisingly, only 6 men were killed, all above ground and at ground zero of the explosion. The biggest loss, half the town's buildings, whether burned or leveled by the shock of the explosion. Strange as it seems, the Standard Mine is the only mine left standing today. An explosion was not about to stop the rush for gold. The Standard Mill burned once again in October 1898, though this is not included in the two major fires of Bodie, and it was rebuilt through the harsh winter and reopened again in February of 1899. Even with a rebuilt mine, the town continued to decline. James Stewart Kane was the last savior of Bodie, and who is directly responsible for how intact this ghost town is today. He moved with his new wife, Martha, to Bodie in 1879 and never gave up on the town. He literally bought the bank in 1890, and little by little, year by year, he bought almost every business in town. Even after the fire of 1932, which was caused by a boy named Billy Godward playing with matches behind the Sawdust Corner Saloon, Mr. Kane still did not give up. The bank was gone, 2/3 of the buildings were destroyed by the flames. The only thing that saved the whole town was a shifting wind. Town population was down to 3 caretakers after James Kane passed away in 1938, however his family still owned rights to the town, and the final mine closed in 1942 along with the post office. In 1962, the state of California bought the rights and turned it into a state park. A very intact ghost town, like stepping into a time machine, even though its state is currently classified as in a state of arrested decay. Now with a town that someone loved so much they bought it all to save it, after 2 great fires, and being more complete than over 90% of the ghost towns in the entire Wild West. How can there be a curse? What is the curse and what causes it? The curse came about right after the park opening. Handwritten letters come with packages to Bodie State Historical Park and are collected in binders. The packages, well, they contain things that people with sticky fingers take from the park as a momentum. The letters are of deep regret for stealing from Bodie, and not expensive things either. A brick, a bottle, or shards of glass through the site. Even down to a single nail sometimes. They go on to explain how after taking from Bodie, their lives became filled with ill fate and tragedy. They are convinced that their misfortunes are due to their theft and won't be free of the curse until they returned what they took. What causes the curse? Everyone has a theory, whether it is shared or not. The least supernatural cause and most mundane. It is a made-up story by park officials to maintain the state of Bodie as it was when it was sold in 1962. The buildings, no matter how much in shambles they are, have not been restored since abandonment. In total, Bodie has 168 buildings still left standing, somewhat. Everything is how the people that lived there left it, pots and pans left out. Furniture in the position when it was the last time the former residents left it. Even coats still remain on hangers. During the 1932 fire, most families fled in a hurry, taking only what they could grab, and leaving everything else behind as the residents were almost sure the fire consumed the entire town, which they never returned to. This leads us to the second theory. The residents were very protective of their town, their homes, and everything in it, even though they did leave almost all their earthly possessions behind. It's thought that these same residents don't want anyone to take what was left even from the spiritual plane. Anyone who steals from them, the ghosts of the past residents, gets Bodie justice. Bodie justice is just as unforgiving now as it was during its boom days and beyond. Much like its name, Bodie is no stranger to ghostly encounters. Spirits are the prominent theory of the cause of the curse. Its ghosts included the Chinese woman in a second-floor bedroom of the Kane house that is believed to be a maid with no name, the DeChambeau Hotel, an unspecified woman, and the Mendocini house is said to be haunted, but a couple of children's spirits, again unspecified. But these spirits most likely did not have enough of a grudge to curse everything, big and small, in town, covering every square inches. These hauntings are limited to the buildings that they most likely were associated with. It would take a lot, something that angered them in life, and still angers them in their afterlife. And if it's not anger that drives them, it could be territorial on the town they once called home. That leaves two spirits. The first being a prostitute by the name of Rosa May, who during an epidemic cared for the sick men of Bodie and is said to have saved several lives. After she died, those same men she saved, and the same town she took care of, refused to bury her inside the cemetery because of her profession. That is enough of a reason to curse the whole town, but what a majority of people believe to this day goes back to the original founder who died in such a tragic way. What's worse, when his body was found, it said he was buried in the cemetery near the town, which has over 150 graves that are known. It said the town was named after him, which it is. It said a monument was erected over his grave. Some accounts said that the monument was repurposed to honor President Garfield after his assassination, and that nobody really knows where W.S. Bodie is really buried. It's also said that after he couldn't go on any further during the snowstorm that took his life, when E.S. Taylor made it back to their cabin, he either went back to look for him immediately and couldn't find him, did not go back because he knew Bodie would not be alive, or never intended on going back because he wanted the gold for himself, that in his dying moments he cursed the town when he knew his friend had left him all alone to perish. His spirit would not rest until he got his ultimate revenge, starting with Taylor. Not long after leaving Bodie and returning to what is now Bodie Historical State Park, Taylor met his end when he was ambushed and murdered. Bodie is still not at peace today because you have to pay to visit the site, and people were still making money off his discovery, his sacrifice, his claim. For those who have wrote those letters, the curse is very much real no matter the how or why. To those who make it out to Bodie who don't believe, dismiss the curse at your own risk. Bodie is not the only curse believed to be based on theft. Half a world away is the most intact and important archaeological site in the world. Pompeii. The city that thrived in the shadow of one of the world's most dangerous volcanoes, Mount Vesuvius. Today the volcano still shows signs of activity, but has been quiet since its last eruption on March 17, 1944. During the time where filming was possible, this eruption was recorded in all its destruction. 26 were killed in an eruption that spanned a week, and thousands were left homeless. Although the last major eruption did take out several villages, nothing compared to Pompeii. No eruption in the world has matched the death toll and just how a volcano can completely bury more than one city. Herculaneum was also buried, but nothing compared to what was uncovered when excavation of the site started in 1748. After discovering fresco and remains in Herculaneum, and when a palace was to begin construction, Pompeii was also rediscovered. With excavation still happening today, they learned the fate of the people who lived and died there, and just how sacred Pompeii was and is today. The date was August 24, 79 AD. It was the week of the festival of Vinalia. It was a festival of wine harvest in honor of Jupiter and Venus. The first tremors that were directly related to the eruption started that morning just before 8 a.m. The city was no stranger to earthquakes, so the citizens of Pompeii were not immediately alarmed by the shaking earth. The day carried on as usual, until the first wave of 6 explosions that lasted 18 hours. The mountain roared to life, ash and smoke shooting miles into the sky. What started as a marvel for anyone who was a witness on that day and lived to tell about it soon turned to panic. Another explosion, then another. Hot ash clouded the sky and sun and turned the day to night. Shock waves shot out across the south side of the volcano. Hot, molten rocks rained down on the city. Anything would caught fire, some stuck buildings and destroyed the structures, but not all was destroyed. Incredibly, most of Pompeii stayed intact. It wasn't until the final hours when the mountain collapsed in on itself, sent a pyroclastic flow rushing towards the cities. For those who did not make it out, died where they laid. Temperatures reached over 700 degrees, suffocating those who could not reach safety. That is what caused a majority of the death toll. Heat so high that no one could breathe. Lungs burned inside. After the clouds settled, the town was invisible, hidden under feet of rock and ash. Just like that, Pompeii became a massive gravesite. When excavations started, most were interested in the art and culture of this once thriving civilization. Unlike any other town destroyed during an eruption, this city left behind voids in the layers that blanketed everything that could be seen. In those voids were bones. Archaeologists began pouring plaster into the voids to preserve whatever they could. After years of digging, the plaster casting showed the shapes of bodies. Permanent statues of the men, women, and children who died in those very spots, perfectly preserved throughout time. Facial features, position of the bodies, groups found together, all could now be seen almost 2,000 years after one of the worst eruptions in history. All those who weren't properly laid to rest. It's believed again that if you took something from Pompeii that you would be cursed until what you took was returned. A tile from the floor, a piece of pottery, even a stone, just as in the town of Bodie, and just as in the town of Bodie letters with packages started coming. An exhibit within Pompeii was made showing of the letters and artifacts taken. The letters are what grab people's attention. Regret for their theft, apologies for their misdeeds, and stories of misfortune. The curse may result from the stealing from those who passed. The curse may be a myth. Curse or no curse, be respectful in visiting Pompeii. Photos and memories should be enough. One civilization that regards resting places in high regard is Egypt. Entire pyramids were built to be the final resting place of their leaders. Egypt is one of the highest places where their bodies end up coming up missing, or their tombs' locations are never recorded. As in Pompeii, entire histories are lost to time. New details are still being discovered about Cleopatra, whose tomb has still not been found. One of the greatest discoveries was the tomb of King Tut. It is to date the most intact tomb found of all the kings of Egypt, also known as pharaohs. After death, the kings were mummified. Their tombs were stocked with everything Egyptians felt they would need in the afterlife. King Tut was Egypt's youngest pharaoh, taking the throne at the age of 9. He reigned over Egypt for 10 years until dying suddenly at 19. For years, many people believed that the king was murdered by a blow to the head because when his body was found, there was a fracture in his skull. The leading theory now is that he had a fractured leg shortly before death and may have developed an infection. It was also found that he had malaria at the time of death. While there are no concrete records of his cause of death, modern science has filled in a lot of gaps. One thing that science can't disprove with complete certainty is the curse of the pharaoh, more specifically, the curse of King Tut's tomb. If not for the discovery of his tomb, King Tut would have been lost to time, but the boy king had an important part to play in ancient Egypt. He reintroduced his people to the beliefs of several gods, including Anubis, the Egyptian god of the dead. A statue of Anubis was found in one of King Tut's burial chambers with an unfired clay brick with an inscription, which became the basis of the curse of the pharaohs. Anubis was meant to lead a soul through the afterlife to become immortal, which the young king is described as immortal. King Tut also was meant to join the two kingdoms of Egypt in 1332 BC. None of this was known until an archaeologist by the name of Howard Carter and his benefactor Lord Carnarvon made the discovery of a lifetime in 1922. What they unearthed was beyond imagination. His tomb had 4 burial chambers, packed full of treasures. Gold-covered chariots, elaborately carved vessels, inlaid furniture, and a vast array of his own personal effects, including jewelry. No tomb had ever been discovered that wasn't looted for its wealth. Everything was just as it was over 3,000 years before. A series of shrines, a 3-layered sarcophagus held his mummy, and the most iconic example of Egypt, King Tut's solid gold mask. After 1922, others joined in the discoveries over a 10-year period. Photographer Harry Burton was tasked with the documentation of over 5,400 artifacts in the tomb. Everything was detailed that was removed from the tomb. Writer James P. Allen wrote the book on the entire process from discovery to museum. Susan J. Allen narrated the experience and shared conversations with those involved with the discovery. Several people were involved in the whole process, and soon after, several of those same people came to an unfortunate end. On April 5, 1923, Lord Carnarvon received a mosquito bite that got infected after a razor-cut shave and died of blood poisoning less than a year after discovering the tomb. Howard Carter gave his friend, Sir Bruce Ingham, a paperweight consisting of a mummified hand wearing a bracelet boasting of a curse. After, his house burned down. After rebuilding it, his home got flooded. The third victim was George J. Gould. He was an American financier who visited the tomb and died of pneumonia shortly after on May 16, 1923. Carnarvon's half-brother, Aubrey Herbert, had all his teeth removed because it was thought his rotten teeth were making him go blind. He died of sepsis from the surgery on September 26, 1923. It's believed he fell victim to the curse just for being related to Carnarvon. Hugh Evelyn White helped in excavation. Upon learning of the possible curse, he committed suicide on September 9, 1924. Aaron Ember, who was friends with most of those involved in the excavation, died in a house fire in 1926. Richard Bethel, Carnarvon's secretary, died in 1929 in his sleep at a gentleman's club. Some accounts suggested his death was due to suffocation. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who x-rayed King Tut's mummy, died 3 days after his encounter with King Tut. James Henry Breasted helped in the excavation, after one trip to Egypt in 1935. The list goes on and on with tragic deaths and unfortunate incidents. Stories of curses aren't just associated with a location. Sometimes, it can be objects. Objects such as the Dybbuk box, James Dean's cursed car and car parts, and the Hope Diamond are locked away in museums encased in glass or lost to time. Nothing says haunted object like a doll, a representation of a person or person-like. No, we're not talking about Annabelle, which is also in an enclosed display in a museum. A doll associated with possession, hauntings, and a curse. This is the story of Robert the Doll. Widely known throughout the world, Robert's current home is the East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. I know it sounds weird saying a doll has a home, but Robert isn't just any doll. He is one of a kind. A doll that was made to be just a display in a store window. He's life-sized and was made holding what is described as either a teddy bear or dog. There's 2 different versions on how the doll made it to a home. In 1904, the doll was a birthday gift given to Robert Eugene Otto, son of a prominent family in Key West. Like most well-off families in 1904, they had servants. One version is that his grandfather traveled to Germany that same year and bought Robert the doll. The other accounts say that Robert the doll was given as a birthday gift by one of the servants who put a curse on the doll to bring chaos to the family for a wrongdoing. Either way, the young boy came to have Robert the doll when he was never meant to be sold. Robert Eugene Otto was described as eccentric, both in adulthood and childhood. He didn't have any friends until he received his gift. That day in 1904, after he opened the package containing the doll, no other present mattered. Right after receiving the doll, he started going by his middle name. He was to be called Gene from then on, and the doll was going to be called Robert. He dressed Robert, who came in a jester's costume, one of his old sailor outfits to wear. He did not do anything without Robert, even when it came to mealtime. If Robert wasn't hungry, neither was Gene. He told his mother he gave the doll his first name. When his mother dismissed him and called him Robert again, he yelled at her. "My name is Jean, his name is Robert." He was so forceful with his declaration that his family argued no further and started calling him Jean. This oddness was only the beginning. His parents reported that they would walk past Jean's room and hear Jean talking to his friend Robert. Most kids either have imaginary friends or play with their toys and talk to them. That part of the story is nothing unusual. The unusual part is that it was reported that when Jean would say something, a response would come back, but in a different voice. When he was 10, his mother heard him scream in the middle of the night. When she entered his room, Jean was curled up in a ball on his bed, all the furniture in his room overturned, and Robert the doll was sitting at the foot of his bed. Whether Jean would do something wrong, or accidents would happen surrounded Jean, he always had the same response. Something would break, Robert did it. Something came up missing, Robert did it. Whether he just didn't want to take responsibility or he had mental health problems, Robert was always to blame. It's said that his family would see Robert's expressions change, would hear giggling from rooms Robert was in when there was no human being in the room with him, would change positions on his own, and even running up the stairs and moving about the house. Eventually, Jean went to art school in New York and Paris and married a woman named Anne. After his parents died, he inherited the house in Key West, known as the Artist House. It was then when Jean reconnected with his old friend Robert. Again, Robert was always by Jean's side. It wasn't long before Anne became uncomfortable with Robert. After some time, Jean agreed to put Robert in the attic. Robert did not like this new arrangement at all. He would be heard pacing the attic back and forth, continue with his giggling, and those walking by the artist house would see Robert looking out of the windows. In 1974, Jean Otto died. The house was later sold to a woman named Myrtle Reuter and her husband William, who took up the task as Robert's caretaker. They had a daughter named Sarah who found a friend in Robert instantly, just as Jean had. It did not last long. The strange occurrences started again with reports of Robert moving on his own, strange giggling, and haunted happenings. One night, Sarah was heard screaming from her room as well in the middle of the night. William, after Sarah had told her parents Robert attacked her, locked Robert away. Legend says after that, William was found dead by his wife in his car in the driveway, succumbing to carbon monoxide poisoning. Myrtle kept Robert until 1994, when she donated he to the museum. She told them that Robert the doll was haunted and he belonged to Jean Otto, whose artwork used to be displayed in that very museum. At first, he was put in storage. That was until strange events started happening within the building. As stories started to circulate through the staff, Robert the doll was put on display and is still the centerpiece for their haunted tour. There are 4 rules the tour guide explains to you before you come face to face with Robert. Number 1, you must greet Robert and introduce yourself. Number 2, don't mock Robert in any way, even tapping on his encasement is a big no-no. Number 3, you must ask permission to take his photo. Number 4, you must say goodbye to Robert before leaving. There have been countless numbers of people that think this whole thing is ridiculous. There's just as many people who have written to Robert asking for forgiveness for breaking any of his rules, believing they are cursed until they apologize. Letters upon letters are on display on the wall behind Robert. He gets regular letters and emails as well, has his own fan base, his own Facebook page, as well as Instagram. Like so many of the stories that have been told about Bodie, Pompeii, King Tut's tomb, and Robert the doll, curses are very much real to those who have experienced them. To those who don't believe, there's really no without a doubt way to disprove the legends either. It all remains beyond human and science.